Zertelo and the Quest for CastleOak by D.S. Arnauld. Read for you by the author. Chapter 10. The Bat's Warning. When Zertelo awoke the next day, he felt refreshed. He thought about the dragonfly and wondered how his wish would come to be. It excited him. What if it was more magic, like Krogrog giving him the sword, or the dragonfly coming when he didn't feel he could go on? What would it be? And so, with more optimism than one lost in the forest would expect, the lizard set out for the day. He journeyed till mid-morning, then paused to look around him. A worry crept up. Was he going the right way? Suddenly a sparrow passed overhead. "Excuse me," called Zertelo into the air. "Could you give me directions?" But the sparrow was gone. It had flown west. As far as Zertelo could tell, he had been going north. Just then, a squirrel scurried across a branch, also heading west. Excuse me! But the squirrel moved too fast, leaping from tree branch to tree branch, and quickly went into the west like the sparrow. "If I'm supposed to be going west," muttered Zertelo, "I wish somebody would slow down and tell me." As if in answer to his words, Zertelo heard a sophisticated, clear voice repeating something the lizard couldn't catch. It came from a tortoise with a blockish brown shell, a yellow head and tail, and short yellow legs, steadily propelling the bulky creature forward.
"Steady is best when going west for Tlos the Tordos."
This was the rhyme, he said, with every step through the wooded undergrowth. The tortoise saw the lizard in his path and stopped abruptly.
"Hello, I didn't see you there. My name is Tlos the tortoise."
"Hello, I'm Zertelo. Could you give me directions?"
"Your tail is blue. Turn round quick. It's the mark of courage, and you carry no less than a sword. Are you a knight?"
Tlos asked with crisp, precise speech, far faster than his walk. "I'm on a road of trials to become one. My quest is to reach CastleOak and aid the Owl Guardians in the struggle against Belfar. Would you please guide me in the right direction?"
"I'm honored, Sir Zertelo,"
said the tortoise respectfully. And then Tlos lowered his head and clumsily bent his front knees. To Zertelo's amazement, the tortoise had bowed to him. Zertelo flushed with embarrassment. "Well, I'm not a knight until I face the last two tests." Still, Tlos looked in awe of the lizard and tried to bow again. Zertelo found his new fame uncomfortable and knew he hadn't earned it. Not yet. "Where are you headed, Tlos? And why are all the animals going west?"
"We are going to the gathering."
"The gathering?" Zertelo remembered the spider's web was built to keep animals from going there.
"A sharing of ideas. Counselor Degilu called it. It is very dangerous because making us feel isolated and alone is how Belfar controls the creatures under his tyranny. So far, they've only had a few gatherings. I've been trying to get there. I just have to be steady and not give up. Have you had many adventures?"
As they walked, Zertelo told Tlos about leaving Forgotten Meadow and everything he had learned about becoming a knight. Zertelo didn't think there was anything more exciting than sword fighting and magic. But Tlos, of all things, wanted to know more about chivalry.
"How was my bow?"
asked Tlos seriously. "Quite nice." Tlos's face transformed. His square features warmed with the compliment. His determined smile broadened, and his friendly eyes widened. Walking through the sunlit leaves had never seemed so adventurous to either of them.
"What Counselor Degilu teaches is that every animal has a dream of how the forest should be. I notice that the animals are not happy, yet they want to be. They feel the tyrant's control of their lives is wrong. Something in their hearts needs freedom."
Zertelo realized that Tlos's journey to the gathering was like his journey to becoming a knight. It seemed that his new friend had spent many long walks thinking about the forest. Tlos eagerly answered Zertelo's questions, and Zertelo was impressed with Tlos's ideas. He saw an invisible connection between things. It was magic, though in some way different than Krogrog's. Tlos's magic was the way he thought about the forest. "Will you stand up and tell your ideas to the gathering?" Tlos lowered his head.
"I'd be afraid they would just laugh at them. Or at me, I mean."
"Why would you say they would laugh at you?"
"They always have. Everyone makes fun of how fast I talk. It's not what they expect from a tortoise."
"I know," said Zertelo. "I'd hate for anyone to laugh at my secret."
"Why would anyone laugh at you?" asked Tlos in amazement. "You are a knight."
"They would if they knew how afraid I am of water. I've lived my whole life in one little place because I was scared to cross a bridge over a small trickle of water. I almost miss seeing a wider world because of it. Still, I hope nobody ever knows about it. I would hate for them to laugh at me." Tlos was cheered greatly by Zertelo's honesty.
It's all right, Zertelo. Imagine, a knight afraid of water. I'll keep your secret safe.
"Thank you, Tlos. I knew I could trust you." When they had traveled as far as they could for the day, they began thinking about where to sleep for the night. Tlos said he usually burrowed down in leaves and softened the soil into a bed. That sounded good to Zertelo. Together they decided on a nice spot up ahead, which they hoped to reach before the sunset. The evening song suddenly stopped. A menacing silence stretched back away to the north. At that moment, Zertelo heard beating wings and saw black shapes against the fading sky. "Quick!" cried Tlos, jogging hard toward a hollow in the ground. It was little more than an indention in level dirt, but the tortoise stepped across, suspending his body over the hollow. Again he cried,
Quick, Zertelo, take shelter!
Zertelo felt fear coming down from above, darkness and pain approaching like a promise. Then he heard the screeching of many voices and knew his dread was not imaginary. Zertelo dove under the tortoise and slid into the hollow, just escaping the bats. What happened next was terrifying. The lizard hid under the outstretched dome of Tlos' shell, unable to see. Boom! A bat struck the armored dome. Boom! Another dull explosion came from above. Boom! The earth and the tortoise roof shook with the impacts. Boom! Boom! Unseen bats were attacking Zertelo's new friend harder and faster. Thrashing shadows beat against the small crack between Zertelo and the night. They were the bats' ugly wings. Boom! 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 It stopped. Zertelo felt a moment of hope. Tlos' shell had been strong enough to hold them back after all. They were safe. Suddenly, a bat's face lurched through the crack. Beady black eyes, keen and wicked, glared into the lizard's wide eyes. Pointy features filled Zertelo's vision. Then the bat snapped open its jaws, bearing rows of teeth, and with foul breath hissed at him. Come out, little lizard, and play with us."
Don't listen to anything they say,
shouted Tlos. "Hiding, little lizard?" hissed the foul bat. "Why, you are no knight, as the spiders reported. Are you Zertelo the Cowardly?" "I'll show you my courage."
No, Zertelo, that's what they want,
cried Tlos.
The opposite of cowardice is rashness. They want you to throw your life away.
"I face spiders," Zertelo said.
Bats are far worse. They do more than drink your blood. They poison your mind with lies.
"Why should we lie when the truth is so horrible?" sneered the bat. "Vampires!" cursed Zertelo. "Wretched, evil, bloodthirsty vampires!" "Just a little drink. Belfar will take much more," answered the bat. "Where is your bright toy, little lizard? Where is the sword that beat back the spiders? Come out and play. Or should we go back and tell Belfar of a knight too afraid to face us?" "I am a knight," Zertelo shouted back. "I serve with the animals who will rise up to overthrow your tyrant." The bat only smiled a knowing, mean-spirited smile at his ignorance. "Your actions will lead the animals of the forest to great misfortunes, and your name will be tarnished forever. Generations will curse Zertelo for bringing Belfar's wrath upon them." "You're wrong! The animals want to be free. We will defeat the tyrant." "To rise enough to face the mighty hawk, you will first have to descend," said the bat. "What do you mean?" Tlos shouted another warning.
Don't listen to them, Zertelo. They want you to doubt. Bats' words attack what you believe the most. Don't let them into your heart.
"Admit it, little lizard," the bat teased, ignoring the tortoise. "You lack the courage to face the dark waters." "What dark waters?" asked Zertelo, trembling as if he had just heard his doom. "You call yourself a knight, and yet you do not know about the trials? Your quest has been harder than you imagined, hasn't it? And before it's over, more frightening than you could possibly dream." Zertelo felt a chill. The bat's words were both vicious and true. His quest had been hard, And if there was some horrible test involving water ahead, the lizard didn't know if he could go on.
Hang on, Zertelo,
Talos encouraged him.
They can only get to you if you let them. Just hang on. Don't give up.
Too bad you have made a clever friend, hissed the bat. On your own, as unreasonable as you are, your pride would have been your downfall. Take my advice, little one. Never face us alone. With that, the menace was gone. Zertelo waited, listening for bat wings or another boom. It had grown dark, and the moonlight had made every shadow into a monster. After a long silence, Talos stepped away from the hollow.
You can come out now, Zertelo. It has passed.
How long will it take us to reach the gathering?
It is scheduled to begin tomorrow at midday, answered Talos. We should just make it in time.
Zertelo paced in the darkness. I must meet with Counselor Degilu immediately. The attack on the spider barricade, the bat's attack just now. If I read the signs right, I fear the old muskrat is in great danger. Chapter 11. The Gathering. Zertelo had never seen so many animals together in one place. There were rabbits and porcupines, chipmunks and otters, squirrels and weasels, all crowded into one field around a speaking stone rising above the grass. Talos eased into a group of woodchucks on the edge of the throng. Zertelo stayed close, not wanting to get lost among all the different creatures milling about. They seemed to be growing impatient, as though something had delayed the start of the gathering. A nearby goose was discussing with a duck the real possibility that there would be no gathering.
What is going on?
Talos asked a possum. Degilu hasn't come. We've been waiting, but there has been no word from the counselor. We don't know what to do, said the possum meekly. There can't be a gathering without a counselor, can there? Asked a salamander.
That's ridiculous. Of course there can,
said Talos. Maybe we aren't supposed to gather, said a raccoon, nervously swishing his ringed tail and looking about wildly for danger. Yes, maybe spiders took Counselor Degilu for questioning, chirped a mouse. A gopher covered her face with her paws. Or worse, bats! We should go home, a skunk warned. Gatherings are too risky, too dangerous. When it looked like the animals were about to start leaving, Zertelo saw a frog rise to the top of the speaking stone. The group of squawking and grumbling animals quieted. That's a wizard, Zertelo whispered to Talos. He'll know what to do. But the salamander behind him said disappointedly, it's only Walgarg. Waving his thin arms over the massive disorganized crowd, the frog gestured for their full attention. Zertelo felt disappointed himself. This wizard looked frail and gray compared to Krogrog. His little eyes appeared sad and shifty. At last the animals settled down, and all eyes were on Walgarg. I have terrible news, Walgarg said in a dry, crackly voice. There will be no gathering today. Why? Called a rabbit. Last night, a monstrous creature took away Counselor Degilu, answered Walgarg. What took him? Cried a badger, unable to believe what the wizard had just said. We were talking right here in this field next to the colony. I had come to warn Counselor Degilu that while his teachings might be good in intention, it is perilous to defy Belfar. Still, Counselor Degilu insisted on holding a gathering despite the dangers. Just then, a huge black monster, long and slithering with red scales down its back and over its eyes, came and took the muskrat into its jaws and stole away into the night. Was it a snake? Cried a squirrel. It couldn't have been, for I have never seen a serpent that huge before. Zertelo noticed a muskrat pacing about the steps of the speaking stone. Who's she? He asked Talos. The tortoise glanced to where Zertelo pointed and suddenly grew flustered.
Quick! How does my shell look, Zertelo?
What?
My shell. Is it clean? Is there dirt? Do you see any leaves stuck anywhere?
Asked the tortoise, craning his head around trying to check. Talos, what's wrong with you? Asked Zertelo, backing away from the tortoise, who was turning in a circle to see his own tail.
That is Gamella, Counselor Degilu's daughter,
pined Talos.
She's beautiful. I wish I'd bathed in the creek before seeing her.
Looking at Gamella, Zertelo didn't see what the fuss was about. In fact, he had never seen a more disheveled-looking muskrat. Her fur was ruffled and her whiskers were sticking out in wild directions. Her bushy tail looked tousled and her ears were scruffy. Why doesn't she go up on the speaking stone? Wondered Zertelo. Tlos looked offended.
She has stage fright, as anyone can see. Poor girl.
No one feels his loss more than I, crooned Walgarg. Tragic as his recklessness was, we must accept that he is gone and do nothing to bring Dagilu's fate on us. Gamella's foot touched the first step, then hesitated.
Come on, Gamella. You can do it,
Tlos whispered to himself.
Don't let him take the platform that way.
The muskrat charged up the steps in one quick burst, stopping Walgarg in mid-sentence. I wish to speak, she said. Walgarg nodded, his expression one of tolerance for an inferior. Some of you might recognize me as Counselor Dagilu's daughter, Gamella. I was there when Dagilu was abducted. There can be no doubt that he was alive when the snake took him. It's not natural for a snake not to kill its prey, called the possum. It's dark magic, cried the raccoon. Dagilu wanted us to stand together. That is how we will rescue him from the snake.
Impossible!
Interrupted an elderly badger, whose years gave him authority in many eyes. We have to rescue him, or else betray every ideal he taught us. Gamella called over the throng before the gathering turned into a panic mob. The snake took Dagilu from us. What will we do? Some mice squealed, running around the larger creature's feet.
He called the gathering? He brought this danger on us!
Shouted the elderly badger. No, please listen. That is what the dark magic feeds on, Gamella pleaded, but the animals were all talking at once. We must think about our own safety. What is to stop them from taking away more of us?
Nothing! We're helpless against the monsters!
Zertelo sensed doubt spreading as hope fell from the creatures' hearts. Will no one listen? He asked Tlos. They must agree on a course of action. We cannot let the dark creatures intimidate us. Tlos looked up, weighing Zertelo's words carefully.
Dagilu was the target, so his ideals were dangerous to Belfar. Look, the animals are slinking away into the trees. Now they will never understand.
Zertelo turned to see several squirrels and most of the badgers sneaking into the forest. The lizard shook his head. Lady Gamella stands for her father's ideals. That is nobility. Integrity such as hers calls for action, and yet I've never seen someone so alone. Slowly a hush fell on the crowd as one by one they saw the lizard ascend the steps to the speaking stone. Zertelo swept his arm before him, gracefully bowing to the startled muskrat. My lady, my name is Zertelo. I was sent by the owls to seek CastleOak and to help creatures along the way. I offer my services in recovering your father. Gamella was speechless. It was impossible to ignore the whispering and pointing, the blue stripe, the sword. Could it be? A knight! Cheered an otter in the front of the host, and others took up the chant. Walgarg, still lurking at the rear of the speaking stone, came suddenly forward. You are brave, little one, but I'm afraid you do not know what it means to be a knight, said Walgarg condescendingly. He has a sword, called forth a fox. He must be a knight. And a blue stripe, cried a skunk. I do know, Zertelo said. Krogrog trained me himself. That he must have forgotten to tell you that the word knight means mounted warrior, and I'm afraid you do not have a steed to ride. This news not only crushed Zertelo, but the whole gathering, especially Gamella. I am his steed. Zertelo looked down at the tortoise making his way through the animals. All around were snickers and jibes. Tlos kept his head high as he approached the speaking stone. But how can this be? Asked the wizard. The lizard hopped down onto the tortoise shell. Together, as knight and steed, they made quite an impression. Now, called Zertelo, who will go with us to bring back Counselor Dagilu? When no animals answered, Walgar gave a knowing chuckle. Who will dare the serpent's cave? Crooned the wizard menacingly. Who will face its dark magic? We don't know what's out there, admitted a rabbit. How can we face it? See, my aspiring knight, you will go alone. I'll go, Gamella stammered. She descended the steps and took her place beside Tlos and Zertelo. We have to try. Either we stand for something, or we give in to anything that wants to enslave us. Oh, I'm not saying it right. If Degelu were here, he'd say it better. Talas smiled up at her.
You spoke quite well, fair lady. We must not let our voices be silenced, and we must think for ourselves. Who else still believes in Degelu?
No one laughed, Zertelo noted gratefully, but no one volunteered either. Walgarg, do you know where to find this cave? Zertelo asked. All wizards know of that cave, a place of dark magic where no good wizard need go. Maybe, Zertelo smiled grimly up toward the speaking stone, but you are coming with us. Talas gave a low grunt, questioning Zertelo's plan. Gamella cut her eyes with the same suspicion about the unpleasant frog, but Zertelo had made up his mind. Come down, Walgarg, Zertelo ordered forcefully. You are going to be our guide. Chapter 12, From Boneyard to Barren Waste. Thank you, Talas.
You're welcome, Sir Zertelo,
Talas said as he carried the lizard out of the gathering field. Zertelo dismounted and asked in a low voice, Was I too heavy?
No, answered Talas. I did not even notice. And I want to thank you, Sir Zertelo. I never understood how much went into becoming a knight. As you quest to CastleOak, it seems you must also quest within. Both will be hard.
You just said it would be hard, and you still want to go?
I know I can't learn your abilities with the sword or use the magic of wizards, but there may be parts of your road from which I can gain knowledge.
Just then, Walgarg croaked something indistinguishable behind them. Zertelo turned sharply, not approving of the way the frog had snuck up on them. Zertelo wondered if the wizard had overheard and hadn't been laughing when he croaked. Where is Lady Gamella? Demanded Zertelo. Getting a drink by the stream. I recommend you do the same before we set out. Zertelo and Talas exchanged a wary glance, but took the advice all the same. At the stream, they found Gamella looking off into the distance. Counselor Degelu will be fine, my lady, Zertelo said, breaking her sad reverie. My champions, she said, forcing a smile. At least you are going with me. I'd hate to go alone. Not alone, Zertelo assured her with a small bow. But the doubt crept back on Gamella's face. Is it true what Walgarg said, that you are only an aspiring knight? Yes, admitted Zertelo reluctantly. Then what can we hope to do when we get to the cave? Unless you aren't serious about going, broke in Walgarg, who had snuck up in the middle of the conversation again. We should really get started.
He's right. We need to go as far as we can before night falls and the bats come out,
Talas said. They looked up, anticipating legions of bats to be falling on them. The sun was hidden behind a gray sky. Maybe it would rain, maybe it would be hot out, but the only promise from the heavy clouds was that the hours of the westward crossing would be long and cheerless. With that uncertain mood, they began. As they crested the hill, Zertelo looked back at the gathering field. There he saw many smaller animals remaining to watch the company of rescuers depart. A young muskrat waved to say farewell and good luck. It gladdened Zertelo's heart, and with a renewed strength, he set out for the rescue mission. On the same afternoon, far away in the northern swamps, a vast column of spiders and rats marched toward CastleOak, where they would join the growing ranks of the Lord Hawk's army. Though it was sweltering hot, and the stench rising from the marsh water made it hard to breathe, the spiders and the rats held together in an organized and disciplined formation. Their commander, young Lieutenant Arnauld, moved up and down the ranks watching for a single spider leg to fall out of step. He led the line of foul creatures onto a narrow ridge of the swamp levee, driving the spiders in rows 4 across. To the left were dense trees, and to the right, a steep slope falling to a putrid bog. The spiders were not a highly disciplined lot. They tended to mill about and walk sideways whenever it pleased them. Lieutenant Arnauld had found making them march in formation a whisker-wrenchingly difficult struggle. It was punishment for failing to capture the rebel Zertelo. Nobody would want this job, but Arnauld needed to secure his new rank. Oi! You there, spider! Someone should number these creatures. Yes, you! We all know there's nasty water at the bottom of the hill. Keep your eyes forward, then he won't take a tumble down this steep drop to our right. But, sir, when I say eyes forward, I mean it. All 8 of them! Now march! The insolent spider snapped his attention forward and did his best to move his many legs in time with the marching drum. A wave of efficiency spread out from the scolded spider. Lieutenant Radard was not a rodent to be trifled with. That's the only way to rule over others, thought Radard approvingly, with a firm paw and a sharp stick. But Radard had noticed a group of about 30 spiders who were different. They were quieter, meaner, and feared by all the others. He even suspected they ate extra food by extracting bribes, as bullies often do. A plan had been forming in Radard's quick, scheming brain. A very ambitious idea to train these 30 spiders into an elite special force. They could police the others, doing his bidding, learning secrets no one else knew. Just then, Radard saw a figure slink away from the line, trying to slide into the swamp unnoticed. Oi! You spiders there! An extra ration of beetle grog to the ones who stopped that rat deserter! Instantly, the 30 spiders twisted from the line of troops and sprang after the fleeing rat. Excellent, Radard said to himself. They will be just the spiders I need in the days ahead. The rat had no chance of escaping. Radard watched from above as the black spiders took the rodent down, rolling him through the shallow film of bog water and pinning him under many sharp legs and pincers.
We got him, Lieutenant,
snarled the aggressive one who seemed to be the spider's leader. Radard hoisted a stick he'd sharpened for a spear and made his way down to the prisoner. Well done, boys. Roll him over so we can see his beady little eyes. Sputtering and trembling, the rat's face came out of the bog water. From the nervous twitch on the snout and the tuft of yellow fur behind the ears, Radard recognized him at once. It was Arnauld, his own brother. Radard hesitated, feeling the eyes of the spiders judging him. He knew he could not show mercy. Any sign of leniency would undermine his authority and lessen the troops' respect for his command. Too bad the example had to be set with his brother. Arnauld, you have been found attempting to desert the Lord Hawk's army. Oh, please, Radard, please let me go. I never liked fighting. I don't even want to be in the wars like you and Father. Even that time our cousin bit me on the snout. Remember? I didn't want to bite him back, and Grandpa had to make me. Quiet, snapped Radard disgustedly. You will take your punishment the same as the others. Another rat charged down the swamp bank to where the spiders held the escapee down in the water. Looking up, he saw it was their oldest brother, Ratfard, shouting as he ran. Wait! You can't do this, Radard! Father would never want you to do— I am not our father! Growled Radard angrily. And you are only a sergeant, Ratfard. I give the orders! Bind him in your webs! Take him away to Skull Hill! Not the torture mines! Now all of you know the penalty for disobeying the Lord Hawk's army. Arnauld began to cry. Within seconds, the spider's webs had cocooned him from head to tail. Feeble whimpers continued to come from somewhere inside the mass of silvery thread, then slowly faded to silence. As the spiders drug away the heavy bundle, Ratfard confronted the lieutenant, whisker to whisker, as no other officer would dare. Don't think that I don't know what you just did. And what is that, Sergeant Ratfard? Now they'll all say, desert. Look what Lieutenant Radard did to his own kind. Radard the Cruel. That's what you want us all to think. The older rat wagged his oily snout with disgust. I worry, Radard. Just how far will you go? The lieutenant brushed past the other officer. Then your worry will have no limit, Sergeant. Ratfard grabbed Radard by the fur of his chest, shouting, You care nothing for your own blood? We are brothers! No, said Radard coldly, touching the point of his spear to the matted fur over the sergeant's heart. We are soldiers. Walgarg went in front, quickly proving a poor guide. The wizard took them through thickets and tangles and over the knuckle knees of tree roots, Zertelo had little doubt that a better path could have avoided each obstacle. "Where exactly are we trying to reach, Walgarg?" asked Zertelo angrily. Walgarg had decided they were going the wrong direction and told them to double back through a mass of thorny vines. "We're aiming for the boneyard, on the edge of the barren waste." "Why must we go there?" asked Gamella. "It is the fastest course to the cave." "Could we not go around?" asked Gamella, clutching her slender paws with growing dread. "Want to see your father while he's still alive? Then we've no time for avoiding unpleasant places, for it is a most unpleasant place we are trying to reach in the end." "Enough," commanded Zertelo. "We camp here for the night. This dry moss should make a nice bower. In the morning, Gamella can decide if she wants to go to this boneyard or if we go around." Dawn held the forest in pale mist. Zertelo wheeled himself up from the bower and began to stir. He was the first one up. He swung his sword, cutting a swath in the gloom. The mist quickly took it back. Again, Zertelo sliced with precision and vigor. He had not used his ability since facing the spiders. The sword felt eager in his claw. He did not look forward to mediating between Gamella and Walgarg. But which course to take, around or through the boneyard? Not knowing upset Gamella terribly, and she questioned every decision Walgarg made. The lizard continued his sword exercises, trying to drive away the problem. Since when did he become the referee? The rest of the company was in no better mood. Gamella kept snapping, then apologizing. Walgarg was edgy and nervous about something. Even Tlos was grumpy. Zertelo tried to make light of his friend's uncharacteristic foul humor, thinking to himself, perhaps he's not a morning tortoise. When Zertelo saw the boneyard for himself, he understood their sullen mood. On and on, as far as the eye could see, stretched a wide plain of bare skeletons. They lay in countless rows, with only a small space between their final resting place and that of their fellow creatures. Nothing stirred there, for it was a place of death. The four of them halted at the edge of the broad grassless plain, waiting for Gamella's decision on whether to proceed. Zertelo said nothing. The scene filled him with sorrow and a quiet menace. It was a sad sight to see so many left there, forsaken, waiting for time to turn them into dust. There were many smaller animals such as mice, squirrels, and bobcats, along with the larger armadillos, coyotes, and eagles. Then there were the giant ones, skeletons of wolves, elk, and bears. The white frame of a great boar seemed to guard the entrance. Long tusks and vast empty sockets watched them coldly. Gamella trembled, as though the bones might rise and devour her, envious of her living flesh. It was time for her to decide. "Here we are," croaked the wizard, "at the most haunted place in all the forest. Will you go on?" Gamella said nothing, only stared intently at a heap of fox bones lying in the gray dust.
"Haunted?" asked Tlos. "How is this place haunted, Walgarg?"
"Some say they move. No one can live near them long before the sound of rattling bones fills the mind. Then over the madness comes the creeping march of bones and death and time." Walgarg coughed up phlegm from his throat and spat. "The bones are cursed. To walk through them is to be cursed as they are." His voice turned to amusement as he questioned Gamella. "Will you go on, my lady? Or will you listen to what I say and return to your home where you are still held as a fair maiden?" And fair she was. Zertelo wanted to protect her, but knew he was not the one to make up her mind. Even a knight could not walk through this place for her. In the silence of the empty land, Walgarg cleared his throat impatiently. "Dear child, hearken to my long years of wisdom. It is time you knew your place in this world." Gamella strode forward to the large white shoulder of the boar that blocked the way into the boneyard. Her paw went out to touch the dried bone, stopping short in a moment of hesitation. "Walgarg, I think you might be the one afraid of these skeletons. This isn't the danger my father wanted to protect me from. My journey will not end here, nor my father's." She stretched out her paw and touched the bone. It appeared to Zertelo that while his potential had come in stages, Gamella's woke all at once. When she turned back to them, her eyes were filled with purpose. "We will go forth," she said, leading them forward. Wargarg shot out his hand, grabbing her by the elbow. "But surely Dagulu would want you to—" Gamella spun around on the frog, pulling her arm free from his grasp. "You never understood my father, and you underestimate me. There's no danger I wouldn't face, no haunted cemetery I wouldn't cross to have my father back on that speaking stone and teaching the animals again. So if you thought Dagilu's words were too bold, just wait till you see what my actions can do. Talos, Zertelo, are you with me?"
Absolutely.
The tortoise agreed at once. Zertelo smiled and nodded his approval. "Then let's go," she said, and crossed into the field of skeletons. They marched for an hour until they could see the skeletons stretching in every direction. The environment was so uniform and colorless that they soon lost their bearings. They wandered through the lanes of animal bones, not speaking to each other out of respect for the departed spirits. Finally, Walgarg had had enough. "We're going in circles," he swore in frustration. "I know I saw this same bear skeleton half an hour ago." The frog flopped beside the giant bear's frame and would go no farther. "We'll take a brief rest here," said Gamella, holding on to her new authority. But she sat down and bowed her head in exhaustion. Talos did the same. He closed his eyes and appeared to be taking a nap. Zertelo felt uneasy waiting under the colossal skeleton. He paced about, searching the horizon for a geographic landmark to give them bearing. Looking back at his companions resting, Zertelo experienced a jolt. Walgarg had disappeared. Then he saw him, right where he had plopped down a minute ago. When still, Walgarg blended into the gray rock and white bone. An image flashed before Zertelo's memory of Krogrog's pale gray mushroom house after the wizard had departed from it. Zertelo shuddered, for Walgarg was the same shade of lifeless gray. How different this wizard's world was from Krogrog's, that vibrant burst of colorful greens, blues, and purples. Yet the two seemed to dwell on the borders of the forest. Where was Walgarg taking them? Zertelo wondered. And where had his teacher gone? Had Walgarg brought them here for a reason? Was this where the frog could see around him the way he felt inside? Again Zertelo shuddered. If he was right about the landscape of the wizard's soul, Walgarg saw the world around him without beauty. He saw it without hope. What kind of wizard was he? After the heat of the day had passed, the company set out again. They were much closer to the border of the boneyard than anyone had expected. The bones opened onto a plain of dead weeds and rocky ground. Zertelo gave a loud cry. "CastleOak!" His tail danced behind him. Walgarg came up beside him and held his skinny arm up to block the glare of the sun. The frog peered into the distance at the oak tree growing at the edge of the wilderness. "No, my little knight," said Walgarg. "That is not CastleOak. Only a large round tree. Nothing uncommon about it." Still, Zertelo thought it was one of the most beautiful sights he had ever seen. It grew tall and green in defiance of the dull, spiritless land that surrounded it. "Why do you want to reach the one great tree so badly?" asked Walgarg. "It is my quest," said Zertelo. "But what do you expect to find there?" Walgarg persisted. "I do not have proof, but I believe somehow when I get to CastleOak, there I will see the light of the forest." "You have great faith in magic, do you?" Zertelo couldn't read Walgarg's motive behind the question. "Yes, I do." Walgarg looked very thoughtful. "It seems your quest would have been much easier if you could be taught to use magic yourself." "Krogrog said I couldn't." Questioned Walgarg to himself, scratching his chin in deep contemplation. "I wonder if he's ever tried to pass it on." "Could you teach me?"
How much further is it to the cave once we reach the barren waste? Interrupted Talos.
Zertelo shot the tortoise a mean glance. Talos looked back at him. There was something of a warning in his once friendly eyes, as though he disapproved of the direction the conversation was going. Zertelo was growing irritated. Since when did it become his steed's job to watch his motives? Gamella stepped closer. If she hadn't, Zertelo might have spoken his thoughts aloud and jeopardized his friendship with Talos. "Yes, how much further is it?" she said. Walgarg waved his thin arm toward the rocky slope beyond the oak tree. "The barren waste is a broad, dry, desolate place. Few plants grow there. Don't expect to find green stuff, nor water. Only some shade and a few weeds and an infinite scattering of jagged rocks. But if we're lucky, we will reach the cave before dark. The barren waste is no place to be at night."
"Then we had best start," said Gamella. She went past the last circle of animal bones and into the cheerless wasteland. Tlos glanced at Zertelo and went on behind her. Zertelo walked in file with Walgarg in the rear. At the oak, the lizard paused and gazed up at the immense branches. Walgarg said in a low voice,
"Poor fellow, if ever you reach CastleOak, I hope you aren't too disappointed at what you find there."
Chapter 13. No Excuses Before the Darkness. Across the encampment, the spiders turned their attention to the trial at the center of the chaos. Their lust for violence was momentarily focused on the lieutenant as he deliberated on the fate of the accused, one of his elite guard. There was little doubt of the outcome, but the waiting was unbearable. Why didn't the lieutenant just start the bloodshed? That's what they all wanted to see. However, Lieutenant Radard was making them wait for something. They griped among themselves, but the spiders were used to waiting. After all, that's what one does in the army. Radard lifted the wooden spick and pointed it at the lonely spider. The sound of the bat's wings came swooping down behind him. Radard did not turn around or acknowledge von Nothkrar's arrival. Radard resented these inspections of the army's camp. My camp, thought Radard. He'd show the higher-ups at the tree how he enforced discipline. "Spider number 659, said Radard. "You are found guilty of insubordination. As an example, you will be executed immediately." The spider shivered. Radard felt the hideous bat move closer behind him and wondered if the spider was more afraid of death or von Nothkrar. With the sharpened end of the spick aimed at the spider's neck, Radard prepared to strike. Killing was always unpleasant, even of spiders, so he did it quickly. The dying spider squealed, then fell over on its back, a leg twitched, and finally, the light went out in its eyes. Total silence fell over the gruesome scene. Radard turned sharply on his troops. "Back to work!" He tossed the spick over to one of his brothers and wiped the sweat from his brow. The tension had been high, and now he wanted a moment alone to collect himself. Von Nothkrar looked down on him, and Radard sensed his every thought was exposed against his will. "One of your own?" hissed the bat calmly. "My personal guard," answered Radard. "My elite." "I see," said von Nothkrar, and no more, as though the matter was closed. Radard didn't know why, but it bothered him that von Nothkrar did not ask about the spider's crime. "From above, this campsite almost resembles a spider's web, sprawling along the bottom of the valley," remarked von Nothkrar, surveying the arrangement with a critical eye. Radard didn't dare to breathe. He hoped his face was impassive. Had he made a mistake? He was still trying to make up for his failure to capture Zertelo. No one else wanted the job of overseeing the army camp. That was sure. Spiders and rats didn't get along well. Both liked to burrow, creating pits everywhere until the ground would collapse beneath them. But worse, the spiders stretched their disgusting webs everywhere. They used them to make tents, walls, and bridges. They spread their webs until it dimmed the light of the sun, making the whole valley a putrid ghost world, teeming with countless crawling things. So Radard had divided them into wedges according to their usefulness to him. Naturally, he was at the center of this radiating structure, but no matter how hard he tried to enforce sanitation, the lanes filled with the ghastly strands. "I was curious," continued the bat, "if the lieutenant had ordered the troops thus to make them more comfortable, or have you simply allowed the soldiers to assume the ancient form?" Radard said nothing. Suddenly he was aware of his brother standing to the side, listening to the entire conversation. "Or has the lieutenant arranged them to suit his own uses?" said von Nothkrar. "I am the commanding officer," Radard said, stepping forcefully up to the bat's foul snout. "And it is in my authority to run this camp as I see fit. I hardly think you have come just to discuss that."
Your friend, this lizard, Zertelo.
Yes?
It seems you are right, von Nothkar said. Our intelligence reports that he is indeed at the center of a conspiracy, a plot, as it were, to overthrow our Lord Belfar.
The bat suddenly leaned close to Radard's face.
Have you told us all you know of this Zertelo?
Yes, we grew up together in Forgotten Meadow. One day, he showed up and he said a guardian told him to enter the forest and become a knight. He's supposed to find Degilu and—
Counselor Degilu, corrected von Nothkar. Have you told us all you know of him?
Yes, answered Radard eagerly. I know nothing about him.
And you know nothing of what the animals refer to as the colony?
Have you not been able to find it? The bat did not answer, but his eyes glanced away to stare into the distance. Radard realized he had taken the greatest risk of his life by daring to ask that question, especially when he assumed the answer was no. Boldly, he pressed for the opportunity he saw opening. Even from above? You cannot find it? Von Nothkar's eyes turned toward the rat. His whole being drew up, looming over the smaller rodent.
Do not forget your place, Lieutenant, he hissed. The colony Degilu speaks of is no geographic body. These creatures are idealists. The colony will be made up of ones who share the same ideal. Families, scattered, living in secret rebellion against their lord. A guard of elite spiders is to be sent to apprehend these conspirators. And of course, they will need a leader.
You mean to raid their homes? Asked Radard in disbelief.
Arrest these criminals and drive their mates and children from their homes because of their crimes.
Horrified, Radard backed away from the thought of helpless families driven into the wild.
I wouldn't take that next step, warned von Nothkar. You'll have quite a fall.
Radard looked around and saw he was about to topple over the edge into a deep spider pit. Von Nothkar watched, almost with a smile. Inside the labyrinth of his mind, Radard wondered which way to turn. A heavy darkness crept over the choice ahead. This was the opportunity he had always wanted, but he never imagined it would also be the point of no return. Some part of him knew he was crossing over to the shadowy side. This was wrong, and he knew it. The small voice saying that he was better than this sounded like his old friend Zertelo, waiting somewhere back in the light of the maze. Anger burned in Radard. He never wanted to hear that voice again. How much easier it would be if only the bat had made routing the colony an order. But von Nothkar had left Radard with the choice alone. When Radard looked up, von Nothkar was smiling down at him. He hated the bat in that moment. I'd crush them, callously, said the rat.
Of course. It is inevitable that Lord Belfar will stamp out this rebellion. So why should Radard not be the one to gain in rank?
You knew I'd rout the colony without all this talk. Why not make it an order?
Why? So that when the moment comes, you will know what it means and why you're doing it. Callousness and ignorance aren't enough. They won't excuse you. Pass this test, and the hawk will make you a general. But no, there is nothing beyond. Belfar is the ultimate. You will never again be close enough to grab your squirming little abstraction, the one you secretly steal chase in the maze you call a mind.
What are you talking about? Demanded Radard. What am I still chasing?
Hope, said the bat. It dies with this mission. Yes, I know what serving the hawk does to the heart. There is only shadow, and Belfar cast it.
Chapter 14. The Cave. Within sight of the cave entrance, Walgard told the legend of its opening. During a thunderstorm one night long ago, lightning struck the rock wall, not in an instant, but a long continuous arc of energy joining the earth to the sky. After the bolt ceased, animals said they saw strange shapes coming out of the cave, sad and horrible. It is said they came from the underworld. The 4 rescuers stopped in a line before the mouth of the cave. Zertelo gazed up at the jagged crack in the looming wall and thought of Walgarg's story. What would they find inside? He knew it was up to him to go in first. The lizard stepped forward, but Gamella's words stopped him short. "You don't have to go in, Zertelo." "But I'm willing to, my lady," answered Zertelo. "Why would you, though? Is it for glory?" she asked, and with the reproach, Zertelo saw a gleam in her eyes, hoping for something more in the aspiring knight's actions. "I go so the forest won't have to be afraid to dream, my lady. The animals have to see Dgilu back on the speaking stone and sharing his ideas for a better life." Zertelo walked grimly into the cave. Zertelo crept down the passageway. He led the company to the point where the dim light of the entrance faded into darkness. He paused. This was the last chance to turn back. To go one step more would be to lose sight of the outside world. Zertelo felt the company waiting for him and made the decision to continue. He strode forward, committing them all to the mission. The tunnel sloped down gradually. Zertelo came to a larger room, feeling the air open into a wider space, and heard subtle differences in the silence. 3 passages emerged on the far wall, pure black arches leading from the vast room. Zertelo considered the choice of routes. The wrong one would lose them in the tunnels, and there wasn't time for exploring every twist or dead end. "The passage to the right," said a voice behind him. It was Walgarg who had spoken. "It leads down to the deepest place you can go into the forest. That is where you will find the serpent waiting." The wretched gray frog hopped forward and took the lead, guiding the company through the dark passage. The stone path descended deep into the earth, wound along the edge of steep balconies, and crossed over a narrow bridge spanning a dark chasm. At one fork in the path, Walgarg told the company to wait while he tested which passage was best. Then with one hop, the frog was gone down the left arch. "How does Walgarg know his way down here?" asked Camilla.
"I was wondering that myself,"
snorted Talos. "Look," Zertelo said, "we asked him to take us here, and now we have to trust him. He is a wizard after all."
"Well, I've yet to see him perform magic,"
Talos said with another snort. Just then, Walgarg emerged from the right arch. "Come along, it's this way," Walgarg beckoned. "Didn't you leave down the left arch?" Camilla pointed in the direction Walgarg had gone, bewildered that he had returned by a different way. "No, my lady, it's the darkness," said Walgarg. "It can trick the mind. Now, this way, quick, to the right." "Wait, Walgarg!" cried Camilla as the frog began into the next dark turn. "If something happens to you, how will the rest of us know the way back?" "Nothing will happen to you, my lady. Quickly now, and stay together. We're getting closer to the inner chamber." Again, Walgarg led them, turning a corner and coming suddenly upon a centipede. Startled, the wizard threw up his hands, shooting red lightning bolts into the tunnel's ceiling. Sparks and boulders bounced around the creature, running on its many swift legs, but the centipede was not fast enough, and the tunnel collapsed on top of it. "I never saw Krogrog do that," commented Zertelo. The lightning had glowed a sinister crimson, humming with tremendous energy. "Wizards aren't easily surprised," Walgarg said, "but we can be very powerful. Come, I know another way." After they had journeyed long in darkness, and he felt he could take no more of the endless maze, Zertelo saw a light move. A form like a mouse made of smoke stepped from the solid earthen wall. It crawled right through Zertelo and filled him with memories that were not his own, sadness and longing, then passed on and faded away into the long darkness. As the company of rescuers continued, they saw other ghost animals and did their best not to touch them, for the ghosts left some of their sadness inside the heart along with part of their memories. "What are they, Walgarg?" asked Zertelo as a stag with great white antlers paced back and forth endlessly across the tunnel ahead. "Creatures whose time was cut short before their purpose was fulfilled," answered Walgarg.
"Don't listen to him, Zertelo," Talos warned. "They can't hurt us, can they?"
Zertelo waited, but saw no way except to risk crossing the path of the phantom deer. Should we go back? He's going slow, said Gamella in a whisper. Maybe we can wind between his hooves. And so they did. As each hoof came close, they felt a sudden dread. The stag was both noble and lost. The rescuers feared carrying the curse of its memories.
Not natural, muttered Tlos.
No, agreed Walgarg, but a powerful reminder. Far into the earth, Walgarg led them until Zertelo thought he could hear a noise up ahead. At first it sounded like the rushing of many winds. Soon he felt a cold mist in the air, and there could be no doubt that they were nearing a waterfall. Walgarg stepped aside so they could see. Across the entire width of the hall fell a steady sheet of water. It went down into a steep trench. Zertelo approached cautiously and looked down into the narrow gorge. It appeared just wide enough that they might jump across. Stepping over to the far side was possible, but dangerous. The precipice seemed to have no end. "What is this, Walgarg?" asked Camilla.
"It is called the Dark Water. In its reflection you will face your deepest dread. Only by passing through your fear may you proceed."
Zertelo shuddered. Jumping through a wall of water over an endless chasm was his deepest fear, or so he thought. And worse still, when he touched the water, everyone might see a dread he hid even from himself. Tlos moved to his side, staring up at the lizard's expression.
"Will you be all right, Zertelo?"
Tlos asked in a low voice. "I have to go on, my friend." Zertelo's head bowed a little. "There's no turning back for me now. I'd not leave knowing I was too ashamed to try." Zertelo stretched forth his claw and touched the water. It swiftly changed into a projection of a great hawk's shadow moving over the whole forest. Then the hawk swooped down and came up, clutching something in its talons. The image in the waterfall changed. It was Zertelo, cowering under the weight of the bird's enormous claw, never singing and never laughing, but suffering forever until he forgot his own name. Zertelo felt a cold dread moving up his arm to his chest. Soon it would take his heart. Why was going on forever without a name his worst fear? Zertelo couldn't see how that could be worse than the hawk's claw crushing him to death. The icy water reached his heart, and the lizard was no longer looking at the image in the water, but seeing out from the cage of talons with his own eyes. He looked out on a scorched landscape, a wasteland of dying trees and bare rock. Who was he? What was this quest that he had failed? He hadn't always been this way. He had been more. But now it was too late. He'd forgotten who he was and the goal he had set out for long ago. He shook off the vision, remembering where he was and the task he had to do. For Zertelo, the deepest fear was losing his identity, and this was somehow bound up with rescuing an old muskrat whom he had never met. Somehow he must jump through the water, not to become a knight, but to serve the forest. Zertelo leapt and landed safely on the other side, for the water was only water. He started to yell this back to the others, but decided not to. They must face their fears to learn that it is only fear. Tlos moved toward the waterfall. From the other side, Zertelo could see his friend moving slowly. He wondered what the tortoise's greatest fear would be. Then when Tlos touched the water, Zertelo realized he should have already known what they would see. An image filled the waterfall with Tlos climbing the steps of the speaking stone. The Tlos in the vision began to speak the most eloquent words about freedom and knowledge that they had ever heard. But at that same moment, when the projected Tlos was triumphing, Zertelo saw the real one begin to shake with fear. Dozens of animals began circling the stone where Tlos was teaching. They started laughing and pointing at Tlos. The stone vanished, and now the image of Tlos was cowering in the dirt as the ring of jeering animals grew closer. The real Tlos surged across the water. He shook the water from his shell, very determined. He said,
"Someday they won't laugh."
Zertelo turned back to the waterfall. It was Gamella's turn to face her worst fears. As her paw poked through the sheet of water, an image of Gamella appeared within the reflected cascade. Slowly her features became less muskrat and more like a bat's. Gamella looked like she was touching a bat version of herself in a mirror. Her ears were pointed, and her nose was hideous, yet her eyes were still Gamella's, only with cleverness for its own sake, making them look mean. Zertelo remembered his experience with the bats and how they had tried to poison his spirit so that he would give up his dream of seeing CastleOak. Just when it looked like she would give in to the illusion, Gamella leapt through the bat Gamella, landing in a rolling heap, and quickly wiped away the tears with the water. Now the only member of their party still remaining across the dark water was the wizard Walgarg. Zertelo went to the edge of the trench to watch him cross, but when he looked, there was no frog to be seen. "Walgarg!" called Zertelo through the falling water. "Walgarg!" There was no answer. The wizard was gone. "That's strange," said Zertelo. "Why didn't he follow us, I wonder?"
"Some never find it in themselves to face their fear," said Talos coldly. "They turn back and never brave the dark water, or the quest waiting on the other side."
As Zertelo listened to him, the ghost of a knight passed at the end of the hall. "Did you see that?" cried Zertelo, pointing eagerly forward in the ghost's direction. "What?" Gamella asked. "I thought, but then it was gone. I thought I saw the ghost of a knight. It was all pale smoke like the others. Only I would swear it still had a blue stripe and carried a sword. Come on!" and went that way. When they got to the crossroad of passages, the ghost knight was gone. "Now which way do we go?" asked Gamella. "Without Walgarg, how will we ever find our way to my father?" Zertelo took her paw gently. She had been brave, but her fear of losing her father grew stronger with every turn. "It will be all right, my lady. I believe we can follow the ghost knight to the inner chamber."
"But Zertelo, Walgarg said they were creatures who hadn't fulfilled their purpose in life. How do we know we can trust it?"
"It was a knight," Zertelo said firmly. "It went to the left, and so will we." Reluctantly, the company of rescuers followed Zertelo in the direction the ghost knight had gone. After being led astray once by the wizard, they were not in a trusting mood. Slowly, Zertelo detected a red glow ahead. Around the next turn, the light grew stronger until they were traveling steadily downward to a harsh red source of heat, like a furnace in the heart of the labyrinth. The passage ahead opened into a vast cavern. A snake lay coiled in an enormous circle, and in the center was a crumpled, shaggy muskrat, untouched and sleeping, like the calm at the eye of a storm. Zertelo could pick out the bulge of the diamond head amid the great twist of the snake's body. It was black, with red scales running the length of its back, a mark of malice threatening the lizard's mark of courage. Gamella let out a cry and would have rushed to her father if Zertelo hadn't put out his claw to stop her. "Wait!" The snake did not stir. "We need a plan," whispered Zertelo.
"Is Dagilu all right?" asked Talos.
"He's breathing," Gamella answered, struggling to control her voice. Zertelo gathered them together to form a strategy. This was their plan. Talos would start crawling around the cavern to the right, and Gamella would edge along to the left. When she was in place, Talos would draw the snake's attention and trust his shell for protection against an attack. That's when Gamella would move to rescue her father, and Zertelo would spring from the front. As Talos and Gamella made their way around the cavern in opposite directions, Zertelo noticed Walgarg creeping along the shadows of the far rim of the cavern. The frog was behaving strangely, swaying back and forth and quietly chanting as if possessed. The rescuers were almost in place when the snake's tail began to move back and forth. Walgarg raised his hands. The snake's head raised. Zertelo froze in understanding. Walgarg was not possessed. He possessed the snake. Just then, Talos trudged forward. Walgarg threw both hands out in front of him. The snake's head sprang forward. It was too late to warn Talos. The tortoise was already committed to the danger of their flawed plan. When the snake struck, Talos drew his legs, head, and tail into his shell. The fangs did not get through, but Walgarg began rolling his hands so the snake moved to get at Talos's soft underbelly. Zertelo stood amazed. Was so large a creature a mere puppet? Zertelo wondered what it would do if cut from the strings of its master's hands. "Talos! Gamella!" shouted Zertelo. "It's Walgarg! He's controlling the snake!" Zertelo gripped his sword and leapt forward. Walgarg saw him bound into the cavern, so the snake struck the lizard with wide jaws and fangs bared. Zertelo knew he wasn't fighting a serpent's instincts, but Walgarg's. And Walgarg was a coward. The wretched gray frog would never expect Zertelo to move toward danger. As the open gates of fangs came forward, Zertelo vaulted up and over them just in time. The snake's head crashed into the wall. Boulders, loosened by the impact, crashed down on the serpent. Suddenly, the realization swept over Zertelo. His tail had grown to its full length. There was no way he could have made that jump without it. But too much was happening around him, and he had no time to celebrate. Gomella was in the center of the cavern, helping Dgilu to stand, but the snake rose behind them. "Now you are both mine!" Walgarg gloated. You kidnapped my father?" asked Gomella in disbelief. "Of course, my lady," Walgarg said sarcastically. "All those times I told him not to speak out against Belfar, and he would not heed my warning. Look at him now! Pathetic! Why not just kill him? Why are you keeping my father alive? To draw others into my lair. I knew if the rumor spread that Dgilu hadn't died, others would come to rescue him. Muskrat heroes, one after the other, would venture into my cave for glory, and my snake would have food for years. Belfar's enemies would lose all their best fighters in a hopeless quest, and I would gain favor in Belfar's service." "Don't you see?" shouted Zertelo across the cavern. He had to distract the wizard long enough for Tlos to creep around from behind and for Gomella to get her father clear of the battle. The snake hovered over the muskrats, ready to strike again. "Belfar is using you, just like you used the snake. You are a puppet, Walgarg." "And you are everybody's puppet," countered Walgarg bitterly. "Gomella's, the owls, the forest. Have you ever wondered why you fight everyone else's battles? Why was Krogrog too weak to fight for himself? What kind of fool sends a little lizard against the mighty hawk?" "Because we believe in what CastleOak stands for, not the tyrant who occupies it." "Stupid little lizard! Have you asked yourself why the CastleOak is dying? Not by Belfar's power, but by its own. What it stood for is not to be found in the world. That time is past, and it will not come again, even if you were to plant a new tree." Walgarg raised his hands, setting his snake to strike. "I leave you with the knowledge that your quest has failed, Zertelo. You never even reached your precious tree." "I will," Zertelo stated coldly. Tlos charged. What he lacked in speed, he made up for in momentum. Walgarg turned to meet the tortoise's challenge, giving Gomella and her father a chance to reach the exit, and Zertelo time to sprint directly under the snake's raised head. At the same time, Gomella shoved her father clear of the cavern. Tlos pulled inside his shell, and Zertelo thrust his sword upward, spearing the snake's chin. Tlos took the worst of it. Walgarg fired red lightning at the tortoise, sparks ricocheted off his shell, and Tlos howled in pain. Zertelo yanked on the hilt of his sword, but it would not come free of the snake's head. The serpent hissed. It reared back in pain, crashed into the cave's roof, and released an avalanche of rocks, jerking the sword from Zertelo's claw. Zertelo watched the monster thrash back and forth, throwing its tail against the cavern walls. Boulders fell all around the lizard and tortoise. The monster would bring the cave down on top of them all. Zertelo had no time to retrieve his sword. He turned his attention to his friend. Tlos was still hiding in his shell as the evil wizard shot red bolts of dark magic at him. Zertelo raced to help. Boulders continued to rain down from the ceiling, crashing around them. Everything was chaos. Without thinking about the consequences, Zertelo dove toward the wizard, rolling him sideways like a ball. Red lightning shot at the ceiling. Then something heavy came down, just missing Zertelo's head and crashing into Walgarg's stomach. It was Gomella. She had come back to help her friends. Using a chunk of fallen rubble, she had knocked the frog unconscious. "Thanks," said Zertelo. "You were very brave," Gomella said. "Oh, poor Tlos. He took all the horrible lightning," cried Zertelo, racing over to see if the tortoise was still alive. "Tlos, are you all right?" "It wasn't as bad as it looked," murmured the tortoise softly, inching out of his shell to show them he wasn't hurt. It was mainly scary and itchy. Walgarg was more dangerous with his words. A rock landed beside them. "We have to get out of here," shouted Gomella over the destruction. They were too far from the passage entrance to drag the heavy tortoise to safety, and he was too weak to crawl. "How's your pride?" whispered Zertelo in Tolos's ear. "Do it," said the tortoise. "Sure?" "Do it now," said the tortoise sternly. "Do what?" asked Gomella, bewildered. Help me flip him over. Yes, on his back. Now on the count of 3, push as hard as you can. 1, 2, 3, push! Talos shot across the floor on his back, past the dead snake, and luckily ran out of speed just as he reached the entrance. Gamella and Zertelo were running right behind him. Together with Dagilu, who had revived somewhat, they flipped Talos back over. All 4 crawled safely into the passage. But Gamella turned back as though she remembered something important. Zertelo, your sword! Your knighthood! He grabbed Gamella by the paw, pulling her back just as the cavern collapsed. He looked her in the eye and said, "Getting out of here is more important. Besides, Talos and your father need water badly. Come on, my lady." "I feel like there's something else we forgot," said Gamella. "Walgarg," Zertelo said bitterly. "He knows other tunnels in and out. He'll probably get away." "We'll never find the way back through the maze without his guidance," Gamella said, her face crestfallen. "We're trapped." "Not yet, my lady." Zertelo gave her a wink. He led them back to the crossroads where they had last seen the ghost knight. Then with a loud, clear voice, Zertelo spoke into the darkness. "Knight of the forest, servant of the light, arise! The forest needs you!" A vapor of light gathered before them and took shape as a lizard with a sword, just as Zertelo had described him. "I failed in my quest, young knight. I cannot help you," said the ghost in a distant, echoing voice. "You are still a knight," demanded Zertelo. "It is your duty to answer a call in need." "No, you are too young to know about disappointment," said the ghost. "I was not virtuous enough to honor the knight's code, though I tried. This is my doom, to wander forever unable to act, though I know I should."
"We don't have time for this," shouted Talos. "The tunnel is caving in around us. If he won't help, we'll have to pick whatever way seems best."
"I still see your blue stripe," cried Zertelo as rocks rained faster. The earth shook, and he cried aloud one last time. "You are still a knight. This is your duty. You can still redeem yourself." The ghost turned and glided down the right passageway. "This way, friends. I'll show you the fastest way." And with that, the company had no choice but to trust him. They ran beyond weariness, with all the world collapsing around them, until they escaped through the cave entrance to the light of the stars outside.